This is Critical Talk with Professor Amina Al-Din, and today we're going to do some talk about housing in the city of Chicago, the census, the upcoming election, etc. Wide ranging with two wonderful attorneys, Attorney Anthony Simpkins and Attorney Abdullah Gregory Mitchell. Gregory Mitchell is the executive director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. He is also a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois, the chair of the Leadership Development Institute, and a board member of Masjid Al Taqwa in Chicago. He serves on many boards, as a matter of fact, and provides legal assistance to many Muslim organizations. Attorney Anthony Simpkins, in 2007, after a 10-year stint at the City of Chicago Law Department, became a deputy commissioner for the City of Chicago Department of Planning and Development. As of 2011, he joined the emerging leader for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs group and co-authored a published report on immigration. He is also a past president of the Muslim Bar. In 2014, he was appointed a judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County by the Illinois Supreme Court and served until 2016 when he returned to the city as the managing deputy commissioner of the Department of Housing. That's too many things for me. Too many titles for you guys. Loving it. I think that our audience will be much informed by what you have to say because the pandemic here in 2020 has brought to the fore many housing problems. And both religious organizations, houses of worship, the city, all of you have been working hand in hand to try to figure out where the problems lie and what to do. So I have some wonderful questions for you people, and I'm sorry for bobbing back and forth. Well, what is the actual housing market of Chicago and its collar suburbs? I mean, by that I mean, are there a lot of single family dwellings, a lot of apartment buildings? Is the city stratified by class, race? And what do religious organizations have to say about that? Where do they have an input in that? So maybe I'm asking Mr. Simpkins to go first.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Aldine, for being here, for asking me to be with you. And I think I'll let Abdullah Mitchell sort of talk from the perspective of religious organizations, but just sort of your basic demographics. Chicago is about 2.7 million. You're more like 3.5, 4 million if you're talking about Chicago and the collar counties. In Chicago, our demographics are about a third, a third, a third. About a third of the population is African American, about a third of the population is Latino or Hispanic, and about a third of the population is Caucasian, though there is also a growing Asian population as well. The Hispanic population is generally the fastest growing population. As we know, there was a significant decline in the African American population. The city in total, the last census, lost about 250,000 residents, and the majority of those were African Americans.
Where did they go?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of them moved to, in fact, the collar suburbs, especially the southeast and southwest suburbs. A lot of them moved out of town. out of Chicago, we had a good demographic shift into Northwest Indiana because of cost of living issues. And you had a lot of older middle class African Americans who retired to places like Atlanta and Florida as well.
I see.
Um, yeah, the loss of the African American demographic has been largely within the middle class demographic, which has had a significant impact on the economics of African Americans and the African American population in the city of Chicago.
So we got a third, a third, a third. What about the
Population wise, yes.
what about the Muslim organizations?
Well, I don't have the demographic information that uh, Naeem Simpkins has. And once again, let me start by thank you for welcoming to this program and addressing some of these issues, particularly as it relates to housing. But let me begin to frame the issue this way. When we look at housing here in the city of Chicago, there are certain demographic information that I do have available that has been put together by the Low Income Housing Coalition. I mean, these their figures are a couple years old, but nonetheless, they do frame the problem that we have. A majority of people have gone away from being homeowners to being renters,
Well,
and when we look at those particular demographics, like looked at the demographics in three congressional districts: the first, the second, and the fourth. That being Congressman Rush's district, Congresswoman Kelly's district, and Congressman Garcia's district.
where are those located? West, south? Where are they?
Yeah, you're basically talking about the west side, south side, and the southwest side.
Okay.
All right,
Mhm.
and when you look at those communities, the statistics, what they feel are in terms of analyzing what's affordable housing is to the extent that your income exceeds or more than 30% of your income is devoted to housing, then it's burdensome. And to the extent it exceeds 50% of your income, it's severely burdened. So
Well,
when we talk about taking like half of your income in order to have a place to live, that's a disturbing statistic. And when we look at those three districts, first starting with the first district, Congressman Rush district, in there you have 18% of those renters are severely burdened in terms of meeting their rental obligation. In the
that means
second
that they're
district,
paying more than
yes,
50%.
in other words, they're taking over 50% of their money in order to meet housing. All right. Half of their money.
How do you do? What is the city doing about this, Mr. Simpson?
Well, let me continue to frame the issue if I may.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I mean there's similar statistics in each of the three districts. I don't need to recite the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
but what it does is magnifies the problem when we start talking about housing, and coupled with this the concepts of regentrification as we see it's happening. A lot of people are being pushed out of the housing market in Chicago, and that particularly is impacting those that are, let's say, that have blue collar jobs. They're not professional jobs, and this problem has been exacerbated now with this COVID-19. But
Mm-hmm.
for the governor's intervention to bar evictions, I would estimate we'd have a lot more people in eviction court here in Cook County, which is a disturbing fact to consider when we look at the fact that so many are already pressed to meet rent, and now those are the same people are making these service in quotation essential jobs in the service industry. They've lost employment. So what are they to do? I mean, it is a crisis that we need a collective action. This is not to spank the city and say the city hasn't done its job. It's more reflective of what the economic conditions that exist in our community, and how can the public sector, in terms of government and working with uh, uh, religious organizations, how can we begin to address this issue? Um, it, it, it it's a troubling problem, no question about it.
Mr. Simpkins, you
Yes.
manage this.
Well, that's interesting because obviously now with the Chicago Department of Housing, these issues are exactly what we focus on. Last year, we completed a 5-year housing study and plan for the city of Chicago, where we looked at exactly these issues on a citywide basis. We worked with the DePaul Institute for Housing Studies.
Yes.
If you go to their website, as a matter of fact, there's an extensive data set with a lot of data analysis on both the demographics and the housing market in the city of Chicago.
Okay.
So some of those demographics, important data points, I think. We measured the affordable housing gap. In other words, the ratio between the households in the city of Chicago that need housing that's affordable for them and their income, based upon this housing burden measure that Attorney Mitchell mentioned, where you're not paying more than 30% of your household income for rent or mortgage payments. And we established that there's a gap of about 116,000 units of housing, affordable housing, that are needed, that are not available right now in the city of Chicago, and actually Cook County as a whole. We also found that a very low income demographic, at and below the poverty level, about 30%, their household incomes are about 30% of the area median income or less. So you're talking about households that are making about $25,000 a year or less. They make up about a third of the population in Chicago, and they represent about 50% or more, about 50% of households that are extremely housing cost burden, which means they are paying 50% or more of their household income to maintain their home, to pay their mortgage or pay their rent. So the need for affordable housing in the city of Chicago is severe. I wanted to just make one additional point. So one of the things that this report talks about, and it has become over the last few years a very salient issue, especially in some of our neighborhoods near the middle of the city, like Pilsen Little Village, Hermosa, Logan Square, areas like this idea of gentrification, where you have a spreading demographic of higher income households. The largest growing economic demographic in Chicago is actually households that make over $100,000 a year. And this concern about gentrification and households being displaced by gentrification. But keep in mind that we also have a number of neighborhoods on the south and west side of the city of Chicago that are also experiencing displacement, but it's not displacement from gentrification. It's displacement from population loss. It's displacement from people that are moving away, or through issues of crime or access to education and healthcare, are being displaced. Disinvestment, sort of our historically racialized patterns of segregation and investment in the city of Chicago. So you have issues of displacement, both through gentrification and both through population loss, which is a really significant issue for a large segment of the Chicago neighborhoods.
But you go in some neighborhoods, like I can go up on Devon Avenue, and I see long I mean, block after block of South Asian investment in all kinds of stores, clothing stores, electronic stores, household product stores, uh, I don't know, restaurants, food stores. And the people that run those stores, many of the people that shop and run those stores live in that neighborhood, right? So are you telling me that because they're making an economic investment along a corridor, that then keeps their areas from gentrification?
No, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at a neighborhood like Pilsen, for instance, which down 18th Street has a very thriving
Yeah.
commercial corridor, and it's based on local businesses and the patronage of those businesses by the local population. But Pilsen has some very significant ongoing gentrification pressures, as a matter of fact. I mean, what you often find, and in an area like Logan Square, Hermosa area, for instance, the Bloomingdale area, these are areas that have had for a long time very strong, cohesive ethnic populations
Mhm.
that have created really thriving local commercial corridors for these neighborhoods. And that is, in fact, what has attracted people, right? When you get areas like Lincoln Park and they become very, very expensive for people to live, and people begin to look for other neighborhoods and these neighborhoods that have these thriving, these thriving ethnic enclaves are attractive to people. And so you often get issues of gentrification. African American population in particular for decades, we've had issues of differential access to capital for African Americans to be able to make those kinds of investments in their neighborhoods, and often property and business ownership in African American neighborhoods, in contrast to, say, Asian and Hispanic neighborhoods, often is not held by people indigenous to those neighborhoods. And so you have sort of a different dynamic in a lot of the African American neighborhoods, and you have a dynamic that's more akin to disinvestment,
Is that new?
unfortunately.
Chicago is also religiously diverse. And I know that Attorney Mitchell is a vice chair of one of the interreligious councils. It's, where parts of the city have been Catholic, parts of the city have been Protestant. Muslims hang out in particular parts of the city, as do the Jewish population, where there's a synagogue. There Jewish families buy up property around there. Where there's a Catholic church, a lot of the homes are bought. So is this changing from a religiously seated population in a space to an economic ethnic population in a space?
Well, let me respond to your question in this way. First, having grown up in Chicago, and then now as the executive director of a Muslim organization of over, let's say at least 40 some different mosques, and in the greater, in Cook County and the Collier counties. Clearly, it's more so. Clearly, religion is a base, but I think its culture plays a large role in this, because people feel comfortable in an environment in a cultural environment that they've grown up or have been reared in.
Yeah.
And you have there are, you say, enclaves. I mean, just like being up at an early age was a member of a Catholic church on the south side of Chicago. And yes, the parishioners were in that neighborhood, and the activities that supported the church that drew on the people of the neighborhood. So, I mean, once again, we're going to this whole concept of what makes a neighborhood. And oftentimes a religious institution is a focal point
Yeah.
for gathering and galvanizing people around various concepts or initiatives. I mean, you still see it today in terms of many houses of worship are also providing certain social services like food pantries. You
Right.
look at the Archdiocese of Chicago, which over the years has expanded that whole process, and even in terms of Catholic charities that reaches out to many people in need.
Right.
So I'm not, clearly I'd say religion and cultural background has laid a foundation for that. But I
Mhm.
think what is playing a more significant role today is economics.
Okay.
When you made reference to the number of thriving businesses up on Devon Avenue, well, I mean, there as Attorney Simpkins mentioned, that you also got to deal with, let's say, capital disparity. Who has the dollars and cents to invest in their neighborhood? Then it's coupled, I mean, and two is another issue that we're plagued with in this city is a level of violence, particularly gun violence. How does that impact on decisions as it was intimated
Right.
by Naeem Simpkins earlier, how that impacts on people's willingness to invest and be in a community? And then on couple that with, if you really can't afford to live here, why do you stay? So I
Yeah.
mean, the number of challenging issues that we face, and to what extent, I mean, historically we have seen religious institutions respond to this housing issue when we have the past year's development of housing corporations, community development organizations that serve to build senior citizen housing,
Yeah.
uh, or in some residential housing. But clearly, that we need to go back to the drawing board and figure what can be done, and the concern for all of us should be heightened because now with this COVID pandemic, so many people, I mean, we've got astronomical numbers of people that are now unemployed. When you talk
Yeah.
about over 20 million people have lost their jobs,
Yeah.
that's a significant portion of our population. And right now it's almost just, it's still early in this venture. I mean, it's only happened since March that we've had this shutdown. And yeah, we're about a month and a half in, but the ramifications of it are going to continue on for many months. And it's time for all civic leaders to begin to identify these problems and try to fashion some solutions to them. I know it's somewhat of a pie in the sky suggestion, but I mean, this is a unique circumstances that we everywhere in the country, all people in this country are now facing, and it's not a time for people to, in essence, hoard and say, "Well, I've got mine, I can weather the storm," because this is a society. We're an interdependent society that needs all of us to make it go.
Attorney Simpkins, I heard you
You know,
say something back there.
yeah, if I could, I mean, talking about religious institutions, and sort of fulfilling our civic duty when it comes to dealing with some of these economic issues, and especially those related to housing. Our religious institutions are an important part of that sort of coalition directed at solutions. The Black Church has always been an important institution in the African American community, and religious institutions generally. I mean, the mosque that both me and actually Attorney Mitchell sit on the board of, Masjid Taqwa, is involved in charitable endeavors to help those in need in the community, as most religious institutions are. And the Council of Islamic Organizations has Zakat Chicago, which helps thousands of people every day. But particularly when it comes to this issue of housing stability, we just did a project with Pastor Edie's Church of the Harvest Homes, and built an entire affordable housing project on the west side to provide desperately needed affordable housing there. St. Paul Church of God in Christ sponsored a senior facility on South Michigan Avenue that's been there for years and years and years. So our religious institutions can be involved in this from an Islamic perspective. The Dar al Aman housing project is probably the first project that was developed by a Muslim community organization in partnership with a major developer up on the north side. So our religious institutions and partnering with our religious institutions is going to be an important part of addressing these economic
Well, how do
issues.
we get ahead? Well, the crisis part of COVID-19 is still with us, but we're
Mhm.
looking forward past the peak of the crisis, perhaps. We might be looking at another peak. So we got a window. How, with in the absence of jobs and people who we're really concerned about, those who are not making $100,000 a year, um, how do we get ahead or begin to get ahead of the problem so that by the time fall gets here, we have made some significant or at least viable inroads into the issues of housing? People don't have jobs. One of the things I heard recently on the television was that the government put out that landlords could not evict tenants. Then I heard, well, wait a minute. They're talking about federally subsidized or landlords who had FHA loans. Those tenants could not be evicted. Well, that's only 25% of all the renters. What happened?
It's about 50. It's about 50% of mortgages out there, both single family and multifamily, are these FHA or federally insured mortgages. And so that moratorium and the access to moratorium through the HAMP program for those who hold mortgages on their homes, FHA mortgages on their homes, or landlords whose apartment buildings are subject to such mortgages. They have this forbearance period, but there are a large number of landlords who don't. Only about 50%. That only covers about 50% of buildings and renters. So one of the things that, for instance, so I think you have two things. The first thing is you need to deal with the immediate crisis, right? Because people are hurt. I mean, we have the unemployment rate right now, I think nationally is somewhere around 25%. I mean, that's tantamount to, that's close to the unemployment rate that the country had during the Great Depression.
Right.
So there's significant numbers of people out here that have gone to zero income now. So one of the things the city did is we had a cash grant program. We had about $2 million, and we gave out $1,000 grants through a random lottery, online lottery system, just because we knew there was people that had some immediate need. They needed to be able to pay their rent. We are working with the mayor just introduced an ordinance in the city of Chicago called the Fair Notice Ordinance that limits the ability of landlords to refuse to renew leases for people. There's also some legislation pending in Springfield right now. There was a bill that was introduced by Representative Delia Ramirez, House Bill 5574, which would, in fact, impose a moratorium on landlords being able to evict people for non-payment of rent that's associated with, a result of the pandemic and COVID-19, and setting up through the Illinois Housing Development Authority a mechanism to provide some grants to those same landlords. The mayor Lightfoot came out with this solidarity pledge, where she had sort of, the apartment owners association and major lenders who hold mortgages on those apartments both come together and say, we're going to work with tenants to make sure that they can stay in their homes, give them time to pay rent, waive late fees. The banks were going to do the same thing for the landlords, so they have the room to help their tenants. And then the other thing is that for those people who have in fact not lost their income, and can pay their rent, they need to pay their rent. They need to pay their mortgages, because this then provides the room in the system. So in other words, we're all in this together. So there's responding to the immediate emergency, and some additional money is coming out through the CARES Act that's going to come to the city and the state to do more of this sort of crisis mitigation. And then the second pillar is going to be what you talked about, is how do we plan for the aftermath of this? One of the things that we saw, and I don't want to go on forever, but one of the things we saw after the 2008, 2009, 2010 housing crisis was, in a lot of low mod neighborhoods, was almost sort of a foreign investor feeding frenzy, right?
Yeah.
You had all of these closures happening, you had all of these vacant properties, you had all of these smaller apartment buildings that were out of balance, and you had lots of foreign investors with lots of money that came in and scooped up all of these low value assets, and further diluting indigenous ownership in our neighborhoods.
Well, I'm going to come back to you guys on both of this, but the other thing looming over us is I'm not sure everybody understands why the census is important and how that connects to the upcoming 2020 election. I don't think people, and when you're hungry and you're about to lose your home, then how do you focus on, even if you yourself have taken the census, which is a very short form, takes all of about 3 minutes. But we also have a large immigrant population who may not wish and may not wish to the government to know how many people are in their household for a number of reasons. But we have to move on a discussion of the census and its connection to the 2020 election.
Well, let me jump in at this particular moment, because it's even more critical now than ever that people complete that census questionnaire. First is, why is it so important to let's say the residents of Illinois? Naeem referred to a population exodus. In the state of Illinois, we stand to lose another congressional representative because of our declining population. Mm-hmm. And part of that is also it's so severely undercounted. I mean, when people need to understand what is the significance of being counted. Well, that in essence, we take our tax money goes to Washington to create a pool. And then that money, whatever tax money comes back for various social programs, capital investment programs, is based on number.
Yeah.
The more people you get, the more people you have, the more money you get. And when you look at, in terms of when we're complaining about roads and if we're being undercounted, then we are contributing to the problem. We're here early on in this academic school year, there was a teacher strike here in Chicago. What did it focus in on? I mean, there were good substantive issues in terms that had to be addressed, but the root problem was the lack of money. And when you look at federal funding in the areas of education, insurance, and now the big issue that we've been talking about, housing. People, when we're talking about waiting lists for Section 8 vouchers, well, it's not going to get any better if people are not fully counted, so we get the full share that Illinois deserves based on its population. In essence, by being undercounted, we're having fewer dollars to satisfy the needs of more people. And that's not fair to all of us.
I
The,
feel
and let me, the one other point that you raise is in terms of even when we look at those that are immigrant populations in the city in Illinois, but clearly in the city of Chicago, as we're talking about Chicago. As you said, they're not. There's no questions on the census to ask you your social security number, what day you came to the United States, what your ethnicity is, what your religion is. It's basically your name, address, your age, what do you identify as your race, and what do you identify as your ethnicity. That's it, and you do that for every person in the household. Those are the based on those people who are actually counted is how the money will flow back to Chicago. When I was going down, coming off the Bishop Ford the other day, and I'm going under the bridge as it approached 95th and Stony, and you look at the bridge and the pillars are crumbling. Those are multi-million-dollar projects. Who's going to pay for it? If we don't get our federal dollars to contribute, and usually the federal dollars are the larger share of these capital kind of projects, if we don't get it, then what? Then it has to be paid on by Illinois citizens. And that, if the money's not there, then what are we going to do? They're going to close the road, or then it'll be just one lane. We must be take affirmative steps to do what we can to address the very problems we're talking about this morning. And we can do that by going at mycensus2020.gov and filling out that 9-question questionnaire.
How is the census open now? Because before there was a deadline, and
Yep.
people think that the deadline has gone.
No. The deadline has not passed. It was June. Well, really, it was the end of July, but right now it's been extended to the end of October because of the COVID pandemic. That it's not too late. The numbers are horrifically low in the city of Chicago and even some suburbs where people have just not been engaged, not thinking it's important. And now with the pandemic, we says, well, I've got to worry about surviving. I can't worry. Well, if we don't have monies coming back into this economy, and we're going to need capital investment to climb out of the hole that we're being thrust into with this pandemic. If we're not bringing all that we can, then it's definitely going to mitigate our efforts in rebuilding and restructuring our economy going forward.
Well, I would like to come back to both of you. I have a little homework for you. And let's say we give the programs that Mayor Lightfoot has put forth 60 days. How are we going to measure the progress of those programs and legislative or whatever you call those efforts that she is making, stop landlords from putting people out? You know, do we have TIF money? I mean, I remember hearing that Rahm Emanuel set on $1 gazillion of TIF money. I have no clue what TIF money is, but are there resources that we have in mind yet?
So, one of the point that Attorney Mitchell was making just now about the census is really critical to the point to the question that you're asking. Resources, the resource question, because one of the largest portions, actually significantly more than the city of Chicago's own resources that we spend on critical both infrastructure and services in the city of Chicago, comes from the federal government. More than half of the Department of Housing's budget, far more than half of the department's budget, is federal pass-through funds and some funds from Illinois. The same for some of the critical services that people need through the Department of Family and Support Services, these infrastructure projects that Attorney Mitchell was talking about through the Chicago Department of Transportation, same thing at the state level. These most of that money comes from the federal government through what are called formula grants. And that means that the amount that you're going to get, whether it's community development grants, whether it's ESG money, whether it's federal transportation money, whether it's infrastructure bonds from the state, there are all of these different sources of funding to address the kinds of issues that we're talking about today that come through formula grants. And so the amount of money you get is based upon a formula. And your population is usually a critical component of that formula. It's the main component of most of those formulas, as well as things like the poverty rate. These are all things that are measured through census and through census data. And so when people fail to report the census, they are really closing out the ability of the city of Chicago to access the funding, the critical federal and state funding that they need to, in fact, address the issues that the people that they're struggling with. So to say, well, I'm just trying to survive right now, I don't have time to respond to the census, you are actually reducing the city and the state's access to the funding they need to help you address your issues of survival. So it's really critical.
Now, I've been noticing on TV a number of comedians, a number of actors and actresses have come on talking about the census. We can't knock door to door, but one of the things perhaps that we could take the lead in is getting to ministers, imams, rabbis, and having them, through whatever means they're using to contact their congregations, devote 3 to 5 minutes talking about the census. If they don't feel competent, then maybe the two of you could form a team. Look, we'll talk 3 minutes about what are the benefits of signing up for. You must do this because you got to have a way in, and everybody's worried about their soul. So perhaps the best way in now, given that we can't knock on doors, etc., is to get to those religious leaders.
Well,
so I'm gonna let actually Attorney Mitchell talk about some of the efforts that the CIOGC has made in that regard. They're working with religious institutions on this issue every day, I think. Is that right?
No, yes. I mean, here is the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago formed its own complete count committee with the prime objective is mobilizing our communities to make sure everyone in the community is accounted, as well as those in the surrounding neighborhood. So we do have announcements made by the imam during Friday prayer services about reminding the people to the members to complete the census, because once again, a significant portion of the Muslim community here in northeastern Illinois are, they say, some first and second generation immigrants who have some don't even understand what the census is. So it's been an educational process for us as well. In addition, notwithstanding, we're talking about the indigenous communities, such as the African American community and the Latino community. Even though, let's say, many have lived here for years and years and years, people still don't understand what the census is or why it is. Many people are thinking it's just an invasion of their privacy. And there's another opportunity where we need to educate. And the council is working with other faith groups to, in essence, how can we collaborate and push this message out? Now, we were in the midst of a big rollout with the Association of Ministers in the South Suburbs, the Southland Ministerial Health Network. That kind of got derailed with the COVID-19, but God willing, we're going to get back on that. And we've been blessed with some more time to do it, as well as reaching out for us and reaching out to ministers on the south side of Chicago. But what we've done is not enough. When you look at the numbers, they're not high enough. I mean, when you're looking a report rate of 40% for the city of Chicago, listen to what Attorney Simpkins just said. And we're already needing money. How can we ignore our obligation, our civic obligation, to go and count it to make sure every dollar comes back to Chicago, that it needs to do some of the very things it's already doing? If
But
we
it might,
lose those dollars, it won't, what is being done now will be compromised, much less dealing with now the new issues that we have to tackle as a result of this pandemic.
well, it might be that you need to change the script. You gotta have a script that makes it as immediate as eating and paying my rent. And if in the script about the census, you want to eat, you want to have a place to stay, you want to pay your utilities, go online and fill the census.
Well, I mean, here is. I mean, clearly, what you're talking about is how can we best message this concept? Because when you look at a lion's share, when you look at many people in people in communities of people of color, a lot of Medicare pay, as they reach senior status, Medicare is the go-to insurance plan. They're no longer employed. Their job doesn't have the insurance doesn't carry over. Companies are cutting back on providing health insurance. So what is Medicare? Well, the lion's share of money for Medicare that we receive in Illinois is for Medicare. So if we don't get as much, then when you go to the doctor, there won't be as many procedures available to you. Those are the nuts and bolts to get people to understand that whether we're talking about housing vouchers, whether we're talking about capital improvement, new roads, repairing bridges, educational programs, all of this is rooted in terms of the significant role that federal funding plays. And as Attorney Simpkins just mentioned, it's formula based. You're going to get based on the numbers. So we need to get our numbers up.
Well, you need to get to Latino leaders, and I think that some of those representatives can identify the Latino leaders in both the Catholic and Protestant and especially the evangelical churches, and to get to Cardinal Subich and to identify other churches, Father Flager, all of these people, in addition to the imam, get to them with a different script. So, and that'll take care of the language differences. The Subich knows who does the Polish mass, for example. Get to the people in the language they can understand with a script they can understand.
Well, let me share this as well. The state of Illinois has made a huge commitment to get people counted in terms of actually providing funding for this. The Council of Islamic Organization is working under the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. It's called ICE, referred as ICER. And that is a collaboration of over 70 organizations, many of them addressing the very subgroups, the ethnic groups you're speaking about, to try to educate the populace the importance of completing the census. But it is like I said, some of your suggestions are being worked on. The problem is that the task is enormous. We must recruit more people to get involved, to share this message with their neighbor, to complete this questionnaire. It is critical to what we need to do.
To their neighbors, but they are tuning in to the Sunday or the Saturday or the Friday religious service. So while some avenues are closed, other avenues are still open. I think that with Attorney Simpkins being able to say where those dollars go, us being able to say in language, when people are hungry, and they don't know where they're going to live. They don't know if their kids are going to go to school or daycare or whatever. They need to have a script that the highfalutin language is gone. Formula is gone. People don't know what, many people don't know what that means in this circumstance. They know what formulas are. But you say you want to eat, you want to live, you want to pay your utilities, you want to have access to programs. The fact that many of the people that lost their jobs are now being directed to apply for the Affordable Care Act, as opposed to being directed because they're not old enough to go to Medicare. The need for programs like that in the city and the suburbs is important. Let me give you all 3 minutes, and I will put this program back on again because it is one of the most critical areas that we have. Um, Last word. Don't
Well,
all fight to go first.
who what?
I said, don't fight to go first. Last words.
Well, when you give lawyers an opportunity, they always want to go second because they want to make sure they answer all the questions.
Oh, but now I got
So
two.
let me go first
Mm,
and say what I would like your audience to understand is the following. We've discussed some very critical issues that face us, our community, regardless of our faith traditions or our ethnic or racial background.
right.
And it is incumbent now more than ever. This single germ or this virus has demonstrated once again that God is in control.
Yeah.
And we thought that we had everything going. So it is also an opportunity and is forcing us to move past our differences to work for the collective good of our community. Right now, we're even restricted in how we can worship because of this virus. But there are communities, religious leaders coming together with officials in local government to begin to figure out how do we move forward. Um,
Okay, I'm gonna have to
what
cut.
I guess, and I guess I'm almost using up my 3 minutes. I'm impinging on Simpkins is 3. But let me say is that the most critical thing I think you can do now is please be engaged with your particular faith community, because that is an important link for us. And please, whatever you do, you can either go on the website or they have the number. Call, complete the census. It's important for us all.
Thank you, Attorney Simpkins. Boy, is some
Yeah, absolutely.
attorneys.
Huh?
Nothing.
I think that as we talk about, this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, first of all, certainly our hearts go out to everybody that has suffered a loss or struggling with the disease right now. And one of the things I think that, this is a time for faith. One of the things that had this pandemic has uncovered, however, hasn't uncovered it. It's highlighted disparities, inequalities, inequities that have been around for a long time. Access to health care and health outcomes for low income people, minority community, access to educational materials, the digital divide, the economic inequity, racial inequities. These have all been highlighted by this. And so this is an opportunity for people to come together to focus on those inequities. So after this is over, to not allow things to go back to where they were. You have an administration in Chicago in particular right now that is focused on this concept of racial equity and looking at policies that are generated by government through a lens of racial equity. So we should all be encouraging that and participating participating in that process. You know, as Muslims, we are called to speak out and work for justice whenever we can, as are all faith communities. And these are really issues of both justice and really issues of individual and communal economic survival as well. So I hope that we take from this, as the pandemic begins to ease and the personal tragedies that this visits on individuals and families begins to subside, not allow things to go back to business as usual. We'll take this as an opportunity to then begin to focus on the kinds of inequities and disparities that this pandemic has highlighted.
Okay, I want to thank both of you for spending time this morning with Critical Talk. I can guarantee you I'll be back to both of you, and we're going to see how we're doing with the housing projects, with the census, and what plans various communities have for the upcoming election. Critical Talk is a production of Muslim Network TV, which is a production of Sound Vision. Thank both of you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you. Wa alaikum salam.